начинаем. Dear friends, we start our work. Я буду говорить по-русски, потому что переводчики переводят, да, все взяли. Мы начинаем второй день нашей работы. Я очень рада, что мы начали эту работу. Вчера, мне кажется, мы поработали очень насыщенно и продуктивно, и обнаружилось то, что необходимо должно было быть обнаружено, да, то есть те люди, которые имеют смелость начать говорить о примирении, должны иметь смелость начать говорить об острых углах. И я думаю, что это то, ради чего мы собрались, для того, чтобы проговорить для себя хотя бы какие-то сложные моменты. И сейчас я с огромной радостью и трепетом передаю слово нашему гостю из Германии, Манфреду Дезелерсу, который имеет колоссальный опыт действительно работы с очень сложным историческим опытом, с очень сложным случаем исторического примирения. И я надеюсь, что для нас, для всех, это будет с одной стороны болезненно, с другой стороны продуктивно. Итак, немецкое, еврейское, польское примирение на границе Аушвица. Yes. Yes.
Good morning. I want to begin by thanking for the invitation. I don't know how it comes that you invited me, but I'm very glad to be here, and I'm also glad to be here in these times, because it seems to me to be important to have contacts, to be in contact. I am German, and it seems far away, and I am born 1955, 10 years after World War II. But nevertheless, and also out of my experience, it's important for me to remember the times which were very difficult between Germans and Ukraine, for example. And I don't ask you for forgiveness, because who am I and who are you? Forgive in the name of the victims. But I want to say that I'm very, very sorry about what my people did to your people. And I do not want to begin without having said that. And your peoples. I was born in 1955. In school I did not hear about Second World War. My history classes ended with Bismarck. And when I decided to make a civil service instead of going to the army after the war, I finished high school in 1972. After school, I decided to join an organization called Sign of Reconciliation Service for Peace, Aktion Sühnezeichen, and with them I spent almost 1.5 years in Israel, working mainly with handicapped children in Jerusalem. Preparing for that time in Israel, we went as a group of this organization, German organization, to Auschwitz, and this was the first time I heard about what happened there. It was a shock for me, because I could not imagine that my people would do something like that. But it was obvious they did. So this shock about my people stayed with me since then. When I came to Israel, later very often I said, I did not meet Jews. I did not have an idea in my head about what a Jew is. I met people, and I'm very grateful for this experience. People who are living in a different situation, with a non-ending war, really, who had difficult past, and try to manage their life. When I came back, I decided to study theology. I got in contact to Poland. I went to Poland. I visited Auschwitz. I met the pastor in the town of Auschwitz. And later I had the idea, could I live with him for a year like I had been living in Israel? I asked my bishop. I was very surprised that he agreed at once. Catholic priests always must ask the bishop. And so, since 1989, I'm in Poland. Since 1990, I lived in Auschwitz, which is 20 years already, 25 years already. First, I wrote a doctorate about the commander of Auschwitz, God and evil in respect to the biography of Rudolf Hess, the commander of Auschwitz. When this was ended after 5 years, in the meanwhile, the Catholic Church built a center for dialogue and information and encounter and reconciliation. And I began to work there, and so since 20 years I am already engaged in Polish, German, Polish, Christian, Jewish, and all the dialogues which happen there. So this is my background. I want to share with you some experiences of this dialogue, of these dialogues. It's all in the context of Auschwitz because people come to see Auschwitz, and this is the context I meet them. They really do not come to Auschwitz, they come to Auschwitz because Auschwitz is over, thank God. It was the name of the city during World War II when this was a part of Germany. So Auschwitz is a German town. It was part of the Reich. The occupied Poland general government began only more east with Krakow as capital. It's again, like it was before, a poly-city with a memorial place of the concentration camp and extermination places. So people who come there encounter the past as living presence, which is still hurting. So, from my experience, I found it very important to make clear what Auschwitz is. What do we talk about when we use the word Auschwitz? So, I begin with some facts. I said already, Auschwitz is a German city where a concentration camp was founded in the beginning against Polish resistance because they were occupied. In 1941, after German attacked Soviet Union, Soviet prisoners came to the camp, second big group of prisoners. From 1942 onwards, mass transports of Jews were brought there. In 1943, so-called gypsies, Sinti and Roma, and many others were also brought there, including political opponents, criminals, so-called anti-social elements, Jehovah's Witnesses, homosexuals, and from Czechoslovakia, Belarus, France, Russia, Yugoslavia, Ukraine, and other countries, prisoners, Germany included. 9 villages in the surrounding were demolished. 40 square kilometers became Interessengebiet Auschwitz. 40 square kilometers, 9 villages. Those who were taken. It all is very difficult to imagine, even if we know a lot. The numbers, a little bit about numbers, about 150,000 Polish prisoners. Half of them were killed there. Half of them survived. About 15,000 Russian prisoners of war, almost all murdered. About 1 million Jews were taken to Auschwitz. Most of them were sent not into the camp as prisoners, but immediately murdered in the gas chambers. About 200,000 were taken to the camps, and half of this number killed there. About 23,000 Sinti and Roma were taken to the camps, almost all were murdered. These are the major group of victims. So these different groups have people who come to commemorate their people, but they come in a different context. For example, when Poles comes, when Jews comes, when Roma come, it's somehow their cemetery of their people. When you visit a cemetery, you want to commemorate your people, to honor them, not to forget them. When Germans come, it's not our cemetery. We do not come to commemorate our people, to honor them, and not to forget them, and to stay them faithful. On the contrary, we say we are no Nazis, we are other Germans, we regret what happened, and if you want to honor someone, it's the victims and not the perpetrators. When Jews come, first, when Poles come, Poles all remember prisoners in the camp. When Jews come, the prisoners in the camp are not important, not the most important. Those who tell the story are survivors and were in the camp, but it was a small minority of those who were killed there. So for Jewish visitors, much more than the prison, the camp with barracks and these horrible conditions of life are less important than the ruins of the gas chambers and the ashes thrown away into the river, on the fields. When Russians come and Ukrainians come, since not so long ago, they mainly did not commemorate victims of the camp, but the Liberation Army. When Putin came to the liberation ceremonies 10 years ago, 2005, he did not even mention Soviet prisoners, these 15,000. He only talked about the liberating army. And so this leads us also to something next. When people talk about Auschwitz, they are talking about Auschwitz in big contexts. Auschwitz became a symbol, but not the same symbol for everybody. Maybe it's still a long way to make one global understanding of Auschwitz. But Auschwitz is a symbol for the Jews, not only for the Jews murdered there, but for the Jews murdered during the whole Holocaust. In a sense, at least until today, it is also a symbol, of course, because of this, for the Jews murdered in Ukraine. Auschwitz is a symbol for Poland's fate during World War II. Auschwitz is a symbol of the fate of the Sinti and Roma, Gypsies, during World War and of a continuing history of their discrimination. The Soviet army liberated the last prisoners in 1945. In the state of the former Soviet Union, the liberation of these prisoners is an important symbol of the commemoration of the memory of the Great Patriotic War, of the liberation of Europe from fascism. Auschwitz possesses a great symbolic meaning for the fight of political prisoners for many countries, socialist, communist, and other resistance groups. For Jehovah's Witnesses, the memory of non-violence, persecution, and death is a testimony of faith in Auschwitz and during the war. For homosexuals, who were one of the categories of prisoners, even if there were very few prisoners registered as homosexuals in Auschwitz, but it has acquired a symbolic significance for the gay movement, for the discrimination of gay people. For Germany, Auschwitz is an admonishing memory of the greatest failure and a call for conversion to good relationships with the various groups of former victims. I want to ask how much time I have. A quarter, because 20 more minutes and then time to ask, yeah? Something like this.
Yes, we have 10 minutes, we have, you have 10 minutes or 15 minutes here, because we started later.
Yes. Yeah, this way.
So 15 minutes, yeah?
Okay. So very short, I want to characterize the differences of perspectives. What is a typical German perspective? I learned the importance of these perspectives during the time of being there. In the beginning, I did not realize that the perspectives are so important. But I was wondering, why are the Poles so strangely looking at Auschwitz? And to learn their perspective. And I understood that I have my perspective. So typical German is that in 1945, it was clear that Germany had not only lost a war, but also was after a great moral Klęska, you say in Poland, failure, defeat, when all the truths of the concentration camps, extermination camps, were shown to the public all over Germany. For many it was a real shock. And it was clear nobody wants to repeat this experiment of nationalist renewal of Germany. Not social nationalist, Nazi way of renewal. It was not like a football match. This time we lost, we will train a little bit, next time we will win again. So it was accepted that there was a new beginning on different foundations. It was East and West different, but it was on both sides a new beginning with a clear distinction. There are no Nazis anymore. In the families, it was difficult. Because it was difficult, it was not talked about, mainly. So in 1945, people concentrated on rebuilding Germany on other foundations. The Allies helped in this or another way on both sides. But family stories about the war were not told especially perpetrator stories. So it was easier to say I was a victim. I have been expelled from Poland. My father, my grandfather, my uncle has suffered horribly in Soviet camps after the war. But nobody said, I'm proud that my father fought for Germany in Auschwitz, or destroyed Warsaw, or hunted Jews in the Ukraine. These stories were simply not told. So until today in Germany, it's a taboo if you have a family member who was tattooed here and not here. You know, the SS were also tattooed with a number. So sometimes doctors told me that they met old people with this tattoo. But in the families, even the parents do not tell their children, normally. So now, and the children born during the war, and just after the war especially, they became the so-called Generation 68. This Generation 68 in Germany was a time of student revolution all over the world against the parent culture. In Germany very much with the questions, where have you been? Why did you not tell the truth about the war? And the normal answer was, you don't understand, these were different times, let's be glad that it was over, let's begin with a new Germany, concentrate on that, and be happy that that's past and let it be past. So this generation of 68 is the generation which is not now getting retired. But meanwhile, it's clear in Germany, it's politically correct that we are Germany after Auschwitz. We take this memory as a critical memory, never again in such a direction. In the middle of Berlin is a Brandenburger Tor. On one side the parliament, on the other side the Holocaust Memorial and some more memorials. So this is clear. It is clear that Germany needs this memorial. But it's not clear if I need it. Yeah? Because why do I need it? I do not know that my grandfather did something bad. And it's hard to imagine. So what I call the German wound, when people come to visit Auschwitz, Germans come to visit Auschwitz, they feel it's connected with German guilt. German guilt is in the air. We are all not guilty because we are all born after the war, or if during the war, still very young. So not the decision makers. We are not guilty, but we cannot say what we have to do with this guilt. What is the connection between the German guilt and me? I cannot say there's no connection, but also I'm not able to say very much what the connection is and how to deal with it. So this is why my answer. I never say, please forgive me as a German. I did not do this, so what do you have to forgive me? And you are not the victims, so in whose name would you speak? So, I found it very important, people are very grateful when I said what I said here. I really, and it's true, I really regret what my people did. I'm part of my people, to your people, and you are part of your people. And what exactly is a connection, everybody needs to know and look after in one's own Bible. In German school classes, which are coming very much, there are many Muslims from Turkey. They are German. They were born and grew up in Germany, but the families during World War II were not in Germany. Or another example, someone asked me, I have a Polish mother and a German father, how should I feel, as German or as Polish? And I said, you are you. I always say, you are you, and everybody has one's own context, but nobody has none. And it's important to be aware about this context. So the answer, German answer to Auschwitz is critical. There was a big mistake. We need to be other Germans, so we need to look for the mistakes and to think about what should change. Jewish answer, Polish answer, Roma answer, Soviet answer is not at the beginning we made something wrong and we should change. So it's not a critical approach. Because the innocent victim is an innocent victim, and why should he change? The perpetrator should change. So some context, Polish context. Polish context is also important for you to understand Polish, Ukrainian, Polish, Russian relationships. Because two aspects in Polish identity differ from almost all the rest of Europe. The first is the role of Christianity and the Church. Poland simply would not exist without the Catholic Church. And from the very beginning, the founding of Poland was the same as the baptism of Poland. And the church structures were the first who connected the different townships to one state structure. When Poland disappeared from the European land map in 1795 until after World War I, in the meantime the churches were the place where you could speak Polish, and Poland was commemorated. So this role of Christianity is very important. The second is Poland commemorates the Second World War with two beginnings. 1st of September 1939 and 17th of September 1939. Hitler-Stalin Pact, Molotov-Ribbentrop. 1st September the German army came, 2 weeks later the Soviet army came. They made a peace ceremony, a victory ceremony together and separated Poland. 2 years later Germany attacked the Soviet Union. After Stalingrad, the Soviet Union came back, went over all of Poland, half of Germany, built the wall and stayed until 1989. This means for east of Poland, that the east of Poland experienced Second World War. This is Polish memory. Once as Soviet occupation or war, then as a German war, then again as a Soviet war, and then the Allies decided that the east of Poland will remain in the Soviet Union, and the Poles living there or still living there will be settled into territories taken from Germany. So East Poland has in this sense, 3 times Soviet Second World War experience and once German. And the people are living, especially in the former German territories, near Germany. It was forbidden to speak about Soviet crimes till '89, but it was family story all over Poland. So this double memory is important, and it's connected with this Christian issue, because the Nazis were neo-pagan, also anti-Christian. The Soviet Union was atheist, communist, anti-Christian, and the resistance was Christian. This is there are examples to not always, but the general picture is like that. This was confirmed by the role John Paul II played, leading to the end of communism. So in Poland, Christianity is connected with dignity of person and freedom of state, freedom of the nation, which is different from at least West Europe, where the idea of freedom is connected with the idea of the French Revolution. We have to fight for freedom against the influence of the church. So much Polish perspective, Jewish perspective. What I tell you is from what I learned in many dialogues, not much more than from books. Jewish world was European world before World War II. Most Jews lived in Polish areas, and in here Galicia. This world does not exist anymore. So, in a sense, Hitler succeeded with what he wanted to do. The so-called final, not Hitler alone, and his people. The so-called final solution of the Jewish question in Europe. This is a very, very deep shock, and I think the shock of the Second World War is the deepest in the Jewish people. Because something unimaginable happened. Nobody could imagine that such an ideology which would say that the Jews are like an illness, and if you want to get healthy, you need to kill the virus of the illness, would become the way in which Europe is organized. There were always idiots. There was always a tradition of anti-Semitism or anti-Judaism. But that such an idiotic ideology would become the way Europe was organized, where it was occupied by Germany, that all Jews were first searched, registered, then signed, then put together in ghettos, and then in the West, and then put in trains and burned in ovens, the symbol of Auschwitz. This was unimaginable. And in the West, people little know about what happened in the Ukraine. So here were no guard chambers and no transport, but the Jews were village by village searched, separated, and shot in dolls and burned. So all over Europe, that something like this would be possible was simply unimaginable. And even when the first message came out, people did not want to believe, and that something like this is possible, especially for such an educated people like the German people. But now we know it happened. And then we know it happened, it means it's possible. It was not only possible, but it happened, and this means it is still possible and can happen again. And Germans have very often the feeling this can never happen again. We are different now. But Jews, I feel the deepest fear this can happen again. And the most important Jewish answer, for a long time at least, was the foundation of the State of Israel. During the war, there was not even where to escape. So a homeland for the Jewish people with the law that every Jew on the world, wherever he lives, can come to Israel at once and become a citizen of the state, cannot be understood without this background. So we meet Israeli school class, all Israeli school classes come and visit Auschwitz, and that's their background. And their background is Auschwitz can happen again, never again, can happen again. So this time we will not wait until it is too late, and we will be strong. And especially in Israel, this is very strong. We need to be strong and to be able to defend ourselves. And not only in Israel, but all over the world. And also Jewish answer, because not only Israel is defendants of human rights and human dignity all over the world. Beginning with fight against anti-Semitism and xenophobia and dignity for everybody. The question, Jewish question is, how was this possible in Christian Europe? Why did the Christian world allow it? This is the point of departure for Christian-Jewish dialogue after Auschwitz, where happened a lot of very good things meanwhile. When Jews visit Poland today, I think it must be equal in Ukraine. They are visiting the area where their people lived and do not live anymore. So traveling on the traces of Jewish life is really traveling on the traces of Jewish death. The life is not anymore, but there are a lot of ashes and extermination places. I always say, and I feel obliged to say that always, in every context where I talk about this, that this is so because of German anti-Semitism and not because of Polish anti-Semitism or Ukrainian anti-Semitism. The Germans killed the Jewish life in these areas. And these mixtures of contexts are difficult. I talked about already the Soviet approach. The Soviet approach was only victory. Now we liberated Europe from fascism, and this was inscribed in the story, or not even talked about. It's probably changing a little bit now, but not yet very much, especially north from here. So if these approaches are so very different, it's only emotionally very different. How can we dialogue in Auschwitz? Not so easy, if at all. And I want to demonstrate this a little bit. It's like touching an open wound. The memory itself is still a wound because those who are survivors tell their story. Those who are not used to do this every day, when they begin to tell, they also very often begin to cry and cannot continue to tell. So the wound of the past itself is still open. But people who come there are touched So it's like a wound in our identity today. It's important for us, it touches me, but I don't really know what it does with me, what my answer should be. It's a wound in our relationship. How can Jews trust the Christian world in Europe? How can Poles or Ukrainians trust Germans? And so on. So, German groups very often say me when they visit Auschwitz, oh, I didn't want to talk German because I did not want the rest of the world to see that I'm German here. Yeah? So, how can we restore trust? To healing of Auschwitz is a matter of relationship, because Auschwitz was not just killing people, it was before the killing of the relationship. And you say Jews are an illness, Poles and Slavs should be a slave people for the Germans, then the human partnership relationship is killed. So healing is about healing this relationship. How can we rebuild trust? Another issue is relationship to God. For many it's also a big question. So when we touch a wound, excuse me, if we imagine here's a deep wound, it's still bleeding and it's deep and touches our heart, our identity. And when someone is visiting Auschwitz, I know it's very sensitive. I cannot say, how are you? Because, sorry, that's all. Because when I would do so, your answer would not be, even if you are a very intelligent and well-educated person, your answer would not be, oh, that's a good question, let's discuss it. The answer would be very emotional, protection, you withdraw, you become aggressive, and aggressiveness creates distance. So, in my work, it's often much more important to be silent than to talk. But this does not mean that we cannot do anything. We can and should not touch the wound, but be aware about the wound. So be cautious. But we can empower the life around it. So I can say, please sit down, please take a rest, I bring you something to eat and to drink. I call a doctor if you want, who knows such wounds. But if you don't want, or if I don't know one, I always can say, I will not leave you alone, I will not run away. I will stay here, even if I don't know what to say, or what to do. And I understand that our center, Catholic center, at the edge of Auschwitz, is mainly this. We are there with respect for everybody and for the otherness of the other and for the wounds. Everybody is welcome. In this sense, a good place against the memory of the bad place where not everybody was welcome. Everybody is welcome and respected. Everybody may, but nobody must talk about Auschwitz, or only as much as he or she wants. So this is the basic. I could continue with some examples. There have been Christian-Jewish conferences, German-Polish, even German-Polish-Russian. When I organize conferences, my rule is always everybody talks about himself and not about the others. The others we listen to. And I found this a very, very helpful rule. So I will never invite a Pole with a lecture about how the Germans are, or Israeli with a lecture about how the Poles are, or something like this. I invited a rabbi from America who talked about Jewish theology of Auschwitz in America. I invited Polish theologians about Polish approach to the memory of Auschwitz in the Catholic Church, for example. The same with Russia, and the same with Israel Jews and Germans. And by listening to one another, and then later you can ask questions, yeah, and try to understand better the other. But when we listen, we open our heart already, and the other finds a place in my heart and in my way of understanding myself. So, this very short about how I try to work at the edge of Auschwitz.
And maybe a few questions. Yeah, Nikolai?
Thank you for your speech. Maybe я по-английски, потом сам себе. Maybe it's too large question and maybe rather stupid, but I can't help not asking. To you, as a person who is thinking about the guilt much and...
What's the microphone that the translators can do?
Слышно?
Put it on.
Сейчас. And to a person who was serving as a priest in Auschwitz, the penitence is a deep internal process, and there are no ways to make person feel penitence. And for me, as a Russian, as my large part of my nation now is obsessed by hate and xenophobia. And many of Russians don't want to feel guilt. To feel guilt is internal process. Other ways to make society feel guilt. External ways. Except defeating in the war, yes. Because I'm asking it because German society after the war was not willing to feel guilt. Yes, but the process, as we see now, this process is now Germans do it. So other ways to make society feel good.
I understand your question. The first thing I want to say, I'm very often asked, how do the Poles receive you? And my 20 years, 25 years with Israel, 30 years or 40 years, I don't know, in these issues, my big experience is people are very grateful. There were times when I felt Poles, the Jews, are more grateful than the Germans for the work I do. So once you are on this way, it's easy because people fear to be in contact with the guilt. Yeah, but if it's clear that I do not come to Auschwitz to admire a German masterpiece. It was one. It is clear why I'm there. I'm there to try to build bridges which heal, knowing about the wounds. The reconciliation process between Poland and Germany began with little steps, with pioneers, mainly Christians, in the Protestant Church in Germany, Aktion Sühnezeichen, Action Sign of Reconciliation, and they began asking the neighbor countries, please allow our young people to do something good in your place. So they went to hospitals to work in hospital. I work in a hospital in Jerusalem, and works like this. In Moscow there are memorial volunteers now. So allow us to do something good. Those volunteers became missionaries of reconciliation, in a sense. It was a breakthrough on the other side, because they, now to me, a woman in the kibbutz in Obrat, she escaped from Germany, was German origin, German Jew, had lost all her friends, all her family, and made a vow when she arrived at Israel, never to do, having anything to do with any German language. And she invited us after a while to coffee and said, I thank you that you came, because I realized that it's not you are guilty and not the German language which is guilty. You reconciled me with a part of myself. I think this was possible only because we regretted what happened. So we didn't say, oh, nothing happened, let's just begin and forget. Yeah? My experience is that for groups now coming, young people in Germany often do not feel guilty and are protecting themselves. They should be guilty. They are not guilty. But when they meet a survivor who tells his story, they often begin to cry. And in this repentance is, you cannot make something unhappen, but you can try to heal relationships today. And it is to respect the wound, and if such a little girl begins to cry, normally the survivor goes and consoles her. I have many such experiences, because even for the survivor, it's clear it's about our relationship today. We need to heal the relationship today. Remember the past, be aware of it, but we cannot heal the past. We can only heal the present.
Thank you.
Вы говорили о разном опыте осмысления, в том числе, что для евреев это остается темой того, что повторение возможно. И у меня такой вопрос. Французский историк Аннет Вивьорка, которая возила много групп школьников в Аушвице, говорила о другой проблеме, что часто люди едут туда с ожиданием, что свершится катарсис. И дети возвращаются оттуда с чувством стыда, что никакой вины не произошло. И это становится новым опытом травмы. Кажется ли вам, что в рамках европейского осмысления возможна какая-то общая педагогика, которая в том числе как-то будет вписывать Auschwitz в этот процесс образовательный?
Now, the school groups which come now from Germany to Auschwitz are talking about the Second World War in school, and it's clear from a perspective which is very critical to this past. Yeah, so it's clear it's not, in a sense, not our history, but we don't want to integrate in our identity. We are no Nazis anymore. Yeah, we are no Nazis. We do not agree. This was a crime. It's clear. So, and the teachers who teach them teach in this sense. But this began with a generation of teachers from '68, the second after-war generation. Yeah, because with the distance, it's easier to talk about the past where the wounds are still open. My experience is that the most important for the young children is the encounter with the survivor. With face-to-face encounter of people who suffered and who tell their story. And then mainly also bound, a human bond is created. And something like, together we want to make a better world. Yeah? I know the situation in Ukraine and former Soviet Union and with the Soviet victims in these areas here at home for you is very different. I cannot talk about this and advise you. I talk only about my experience.
My name is Alexander. I am deacon of First Baptist Church. It's information for my brother in Christ. Теперь по-русски. У нас тут на территории бывшего СССР был свой Освенцим, и назывался он ГУЛАГ. Очень много людей пострадало, будучи пройдя вот эти все лагеря, сталинские лагеря. И очень много людей находились по ту сторону колючки. Были стукачи, были те, которые заявляли там, на своих близких, чтобы занять квартиру из каких-то интересов. Были охранники, были те, кто расстреливал. Были разные нехорошие люди, которых потомки живут среди нас. Вы, как не только психолог, социолог, культуролог и вообще хороший человек, вы еще и духовное лицо. И вы, я думаю, что вы знаете, прекрасно знаете Священное Писание, и вы знаете, что Бог сказал первому убийце, которого имя Каин: проклят ты от земли. Проклятие на людей, на человеке, который пролил человеческую кровь, лежит проклятие. Это проклятие лежит и на его потомках. У меня мой вопрос к чему сводится. Вот вы, как духовное лицо, какой совет можете дать потомкам тех людей, которые проливали кровь и в Аушвице, и в ГУЛАГе? Спасибо.
God put a sign on Cain. Cain, in the Bible story, Cain, the murder of his brother Abel, of course was punished by God, but God also gave him a sign that nobody should kill him. So God still protects even the perpetrator. Punishes, but does not destroy totally. And so for me is this is an important point, there is always hope for the perpetrators. If he returns into relationship with God, if he repents, and if he wants to heal the wounded relationship. But there are conditions, yeah? So, in encounters with perpetrator and victim, of course the victim must be ready to encounter. But what would mean to forgive? What happened, happened. We cannot forget. To forgive in this sense means to offer the other the chance of a new relationship, but also not without condition. Because he has to, for Catholic priests, there are rules for confession. You have to understand your sin, you have to regret your sin, you have to restore what you destroyed as much as possible, and you have, if you not can, to do something else. It's a repentance work, something good instead. So, if sometimes a perpetrator only will be able to convert if he understands the suffering of his victim. I know this from my own little life and little sins, yeah, but there were situations where something happened, and afterwards only I began to understand what did I do when I realized how the other person suffered from what I did. In the moment I did not feel it or know it. So these encounters face to face with the other, and this is what Aktionsunitization tried to do, build bridges of encounters. Of course, Aktionsunitization from the perpetrator side, but it would not have been possible if not from the victim side they would have been welcomed. It was not normal that the Jews who fled from Germany during the war and made the German language kibbutz, or not German language kibbutz, Hebrew language kibbutz, but would receive Germans. That was already an openness from their side. But the real healing is when I very often say, when the perpetrators need to cry about the wounds, about the suffering of his victims. And only these tears heal. It does not heal, let's forget it, let's begin a new story, let's do as if nothing happened. Something happened and we cannot do as if nothing happened. So, to clean this memory is only by finding the human dimension which connects in this.
Maybe very short question, because we thought, no. We thought out of schedule, but it's very important points. And I understand, I consciously didn't stop, and I consciously gave more time because we all try to find answers for our own questions. And we understand that in our history we have wounds with which we don't know how to manage them. And we try to find in your speech answers for our questions, and we understand that we have our own way, absolutely. We can't use other experience, regrettably. So, last question, very short, and we'll go further. Большое спасибо за ваш труд.
Включите, пожалуйста, Нет, нужно выключить.
Большое спасибо за ваш доклад. У меня очень короткий вопрос. Я перебрала много формулировок в конечном итоге. Я хотела спросить Манфреда, из вашего личного опыта, если человек условно приезжает не наполненный историями, не читавших множество книг по концентрационным лагерям, он просто приезжает с экскурсией, и если не происходит какого-то такого надмеренного угнетания через личность экскурсовода, он может быть условно пустым, потому что я видела подобное в Яд Вашеме, когда люди приходили и видели там только музей, экспонации и интерактивность и так далее, так далее, так далее. Вот. Может ли человеку выйти из помещения бывшего концентрационного лагеря и лагеря уничтожения без какого-то потрясения, если оно не было создано намеренно, и если его не вводили по наиболее травматичным местам, как, например, возле волос, детских игрушек и тому подобное. Вот что происходит в такой вот момент? Спасибо большое.
Same question, a footnote to the same question. You said that the meeting face-to-face with the survivors is crucial. What shall we do when there will be no more survivors? Which is already the case for the Holodomor, and which will soon be the case for the Shoah.
I very often ask this question. First, what changes always is, even if someone has read a lot of books, to be in the place you feel the reality. Touches, it really happened. And here. And it touches your heart. So, if you open and really, the main problem is, what does it do with your heart? What will be your answer? I very often say, if you come to Auschwitz and leave Auschwitz and cannot believe anymore in God, or that God is good, or that human beings are good, and that the only sense of life is to fight for your own survival, and become an egoist, and call for revenge or something like this, or if you fall into depression, and it might be better not to come to Auschwitz. Yeah, more helpful for all of us. So what makes it that to be touched by what happened in Auschwitz becomes a good experience? For me, the first is the dignity of the victims. Yeah, if you look in Auschwitz only to the machine of death, you cannot see the dignity of the victims. But if you imagine that everybody who was killed, in my religious language, was an image of God, but was a person worthwhile living, worthwhile being loved, and their testimony for us is make a world where we respect one another, and this is the call of Auschwitz for me, make a better world. And the survivor, after meeting, once said, isn't it wonderful that today we can be friends? And this is like a message, a task. It's not normal, it's a task. So, if this message, this task, this vocation reaches our heart, I will be very happy. And it continues, because the survivors will not be in 20 years. There still are, and all groups can talk with one. Almost. But their message remains, and the children remain, and grandchildren, and complex contexts. So when an Israeli school class comes to visit Auschwitz, there are no survivors. Yeah, they were born in Israel, they are Sabres, they have their own problems, their own world. But they look at two Germans and ask, how are you today? And the German school class sees an Israeli school class, and they come to me and say, why did they look so angry? Or I wanted to go to them and shake their hands during the visit in Auschwitz. And someone came and I should go away. So this for the young people makes it much more feel that the wound is still a wound and still something is between us which needs to be healed than the past which we cannot heal, which just happened.
Thank you very, very much. I don't know how to make him.
No, when the light is off, you can speak.
Okay, I'll speak loud. Thank you very much. I understand that we all have many, many questions. And maybe we'll keep these questions to coffee break, maybe for, let's prolong. Thank you very much for your report. Thank you.
For your patience.